Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum to lecture number 17 of Software Engineering 1 CSC 291. In today's lecture we will continue with our topic from the last lecture, which was on data flow diagrams. In the last lecture we covered various things about DFDs. Let's have a quick recap of what we did in lecture number 16, or introductory lecture on data flow diagrams. We started off with the question that we normally ask when we start every diagram, that where does this diagram fit in? Okay. And the second question was that why do we need to do that? And we got the answers to both these questions. That the first question, that where these DFDs fit in, because we know that if we look at the key steps in any process model, we have analysis phase, we have design phase, then we have implementation, then we have testing, and then finally we deploy the solution. So we figured out that these DFDs, they come in to the analysis phase. So, but again, we have been covering the analysis phase for so many lectures now. We started off with use case diagrams, and we did activity diagrams, we did swim lane diagrams, we did sequence diagrams, collaboration diagrams, and then we came to DFDs. So, where to make these DFDs? And we said that you can start making these DFDs once you have these use case diagrams. Okay, so basically, they use case diagrams, or let's say you have set of requirements. Okay, because what these DFDs they do actually, in fact there should have been another question here which we did answer in the last lecture, that these DFDs, they tell the customer, or there are these diagrams, they are basically tools through which we can explain to the customer as an analyst that once you implement, or once we implement your solution or computerize your processes, then this is what we think it will look like. Okay, so this is what DFDs are for, and they usually fit in once we have the use case diagrams, and once you have those requirements, then you can start making these DFDs. And why? Because I have already answered this question, why and what, that these DFDs, they tell the customer that as an analyst we think that these are the different processes that are in place in your company, and once we computerize it, that's how they will look. Okay, and then we saw what are the different elements involved in a DFD, and how do we label different elements, and the notation, and how do we balance a DFD, or what do we mean by balancing a DFD. So we will quickly, because in this lecture we intend to cover more examples, okay, on DFDs, so that you get familiar with the different concepts about DFDs and you get comfortable with drawing data flow diagrams. Before we start those examples, let's quickly recap what are the different elements and labels and notation and balancing. We'll quickly recap these concepts and then we will move on to the examples. Okay, so there are how many elements were there in a DFD? If you guys remember, there were basically 4 things that we draw in a DFD. Number 1, we have external entities. Okay. Number 2, we have data flows. Number 3, we have data stores, and number 4, we have the processes. Okay, so what do we mean by external entity? It's anything that is sending some data into our system or receiving some information from our system. Okay, so anything that is outside the system and it's sending some data or receiving some data from the system, that is an external entity. And how do we represent an external entity? We said that either it's a rectangle with the name of the entity written inside, or it's an oval shape with the name of the entity written here. For example, if we say the entity is a customer, then that's how it will look like. Okay, and then we have data flows. Data flows are represented by an arrow, okay, and the direction is in which direction the data is flowing. So for example, data flow can be between any of these elements. There can be a data flow between an external entity and a process. There can be data flow between the stores and the processes, or stores and so each data flow is labeled and the direction tells in which direction the data is going to. Okay, and in terms of how do we label a data flow, we said that usually the nouns and adjectives, okay, in a use case description, they become the data flows, because they should represent what kind of data is flowing between the two processes or between an entity and a process. Okay, so it's very important when we label them that this is not a verb. Okay, then we had data stores. Or data stores ki representation, it was again a rectangle, and we can write D here, which would signify that it's a data store. Okay, and then we can write the name of the data store. For example, you are maintaining the customer record, so you can name it customer data or customer record. Okay, then finally we have processes. Okay, there are two ways of showing the processes that has been followed in different examples. Actually, one way is that we have something like that, we do that and we write the name of the process, or we can have a circle, okay, and write the name of the process here. For example, in the last example, the safe home example, so our level 0 DFD or the context DFD has only one process, which was let's say safe home solution. So that's how we will write the process. Okay, and usually the processes, they are the verbs, okay, because they are the ones who actually transform the data. Okay, so these were the four elements that we covered, and we have discussed that how we said that we will label these different elements. Okay, then let's quickly look at I guess the title of this slide should have been numbering rather than notation, because we already covered the notation. In this slide, basically what we will cover mainly is numbering, because numbering is really important when we discuss DFDs. Okay, now the first level of a DFD is called context DFD. Okay, and we discussed that in a context DFD we have some external entities, okay, which pass some data to our main software that we are going to make, and then there is some output which goes again to some entities. Okay, and we do not give it a name because this is the main process. Okay, and we call it the level 0 DFD or the context DFD. So we call it level 0 or the context DFD. But when we come to level 1, we will decompose this main process, because we are interested in knowing that whatever data is flowing, for example this data that is coming from these different entities to this process, we want to know that how this data is being transformed and how these outputs are being generated. So we want to know what are the internal processes. Okay, so what we would do is we will basically decompose this into sub processes. So let's say we say that there are 4 main sub processes that we have identified. Okay, but again remember one thing, okay, we'll come to that later. And then how do we label them? So we have identified 4, so we basically number them as 1.1, or we say 2, then we say 3, and we say 4. Okay, this is optional. You can always write 1.0, 2.0 and 3.0 and 4.0, but you can also write 1, 2, 3, 4. That's absolutely fine. So when we decompose a level 0 DFD into a level 1 DFD, then we basically decompose our main bubble into different sub processes. So we have identified 4 sub processes. Okay, but keep this thing in mind that when we are decomposing, when we are at level 1, then our boundary is basically this. Our boundary is basically the main bubble. Okay, and the data that was coming into our system there, it will be the same. Okay, so for example, we had two flows of data that were coming in, and there were 2 data flows that were going out of the main bubble in level 0. They should remain the same in level 1. Okay, this is called balancing. Okay, that the number of data flows in 2 levels, they should be same. ये data flows change नहीं होने चाहिए. अगर ये change हो जाएंगे, तो that would mean that we have done something wrong. Okay, and our DFDs, they are not balanced. So this is the concept of balancing in the DFDs. Okay, जी. Now we say कि 1 takes this input, it passes it to 2, and then it transforms and give it to another entity, and same is true with that. Okay, now this is level 1. But what happens when we do level 2 DFDs? And another thing that we discussed in when we were discussing this numbering or this notation, that level 1 is a DFD which has basically all the elements in a DFD. It would have entities, it would have data stores, it would have processes, and so it has basically, it can have all the 4 elements. Whereas in a context DFD, we are not interested in showing data stores, okay? Because the reason is कि हमने पूरे system को एक bubble ले लिया. So we are not decomposing it, we are not showing any. Otherwise, it also has 3 elements. Okay, when we move to level 2, then this is something interesting. Because for all these 4 processes, we can make 4 different level 2 DFDs, okay? So for all these 4, we can create 4 level 2 DFDs, okay? So let's say we decompose 1 into 2 sub-processes. We call 1.1 and 1.2, okay? And we decompose 2 into 2.1 and 2.2 and 2.3. Similarly, we say, okay, we decompose 3 into 2, 3.1 and 3.2, and we decompose 4 into 4 sub-processes, 4.1, 4.2, 4.3 and 4.4. Okay, now the boundaries of these level 2 DFDs, for example, boundary of this DFD is this, okay, and we will only show the incoming data, जो कि हमने कहा था कि इसमें से we saw कि there is only one data flow coming in and one going out, so we can have something like that, okay, and we will have labels. And similarly, so again we can see that this is balanced. There is one data flow going out and there is one coming in, and we can see that here as well, okay? So every next level balancing should be there. The data flows जो उस boundary के अंदर data flow पिछले level में आ रहे थे, next level में भी उतनी ही data flow अंदर आने चाहिए और उतने ही बाहर जाने चाहिए. If that is not the case, then our DFDs, they are not balanced, okay? And you can see the numbering here. So all of these 4 DFDs, they are level 2 DFDs, like we have decomposed all the processes that we had in level 1 into sub-processes, okay? And similarly, we saw that we can go on further. We can have level 3, level 4, level 5 DFDs, it depends on the problem. And we saw a guideline, that a general guideline that we saw, that if there are 8 or more flows coming in or going out, you know, whatever is the case, from a process, then we can decompose it further, because it would mean that this is a complex process and you want to know how it is dealing with all this data, okay? That was a general guideline. But even if the number of data flows are less and you still are interested in knowing how this process might be decomposed into sub-processes, and we can get more information about how this data will be processed, then you can decompose, you can still decompose it, okay? So in this slide, we've seen how do we number DFDs, we covered the concept of boundaries, and we covered the concept of balancing, and how do we decompose DFD. So that was what we covered in the previous lecture, okay? And in today's lecture, as I already told you, that we will be doing just some examples, okay? And the idea is that you guys get familiar with the concept of DFDs, and you know, you can basically feel comfortable while trying them. Okay, we'll start off with one of the examples that we started doing in the last lecture, and we only were up to context level 0 DFD, and we had to finish the lecture. But let's quickly recap. Okay, when we drew that level 1 DFD, so these were the entities that we identified, and the software was safe form software, okay? So this is our main bubble, which tells KG what is the solution, okay? And we can see that there are 2 data inflows and there are 3 data outflows, okay? And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 entities, okay? One thing that you need to know, that there can be more data flows. So it is not necessary that there will be just one. There can be the case that you will see examples jahan pe there would be some data flows going out to, you know, these entities again. So the number of flows, it can be more than it can be same, or it can be more than the number of entities, okay? But again, the important thing is that we need to label all the data flows, okay? Just for example, here our first entity that we figured out, it was control panel, and there was one input coming from control panel to this software, which was the user commands and data, okay? And so we labeled that. And similarly, then we had sensors, or sensors से हमें क्या आ रहा था, sensor status आ रहा था. We saw कि if there are smoke sensors, तो उसका status आ रहा था कि whether it has detected smoke. If it's motion sensors, so whether they have detected some motion. So whatever event were occurring at a sensor, our solution, it was basically notified that there is something happening. Similarly, about the outflows, one thing that was going out of our system was some display. that the customer is interested in. Okay, for example, he entered his PIN and the PIN was wrong, then he wants to know, okay, the PIN was wrong. Or if you want to change some configuration settings, then he want to know what he's changing. So there is some display information that is going to the customer. So we have a control panel display entity जिसके ऊपर वो जा रहा है. Similarly, then we had two other entities. One was alarm and the other was telephone line. For example, you detect that a sensor event, okay, there is smoke, okay, and you want to call the fire brigade and you want to also alarm so that everybody knows that there is fire in the house. So those were the two kinds of data that were going. One was going to the alarm, which was alarm type. If it's fire, there should be a different alarm, and if somebody or some intruder has came into your house, then the alarm sound should be different, and the telephones should be different. For example, in case of fire, you would want to call fire brigade, whereas if somebody comes in or breaks into your house, then you would want to call police. So basically, we can see that there are two inflows data and three outflows data, and they were going to different entities. So this was the context DFD for the safe home security function. Okay, once again, this example is taken from the Pressman book, which is one of the books that I have recommended you for this course. Okay. Now the second step was that how do we decompose this DFD further, because what we want to do is we want to identify that how we can decompose this, because we want to know कि जब user की command आती है system के अंदर, so how does this safe home software deals with that, okay, and how it actually transforms those two inputs into those three outputs, okay. So that's why we want to decompose the safe home software, and one of the ways of doing that, because once you have made the different use case diagrams, you will have a lot of text in the form of use case descriptions. So what you can do is you can go through that, and once you read it, you can identify all the verbs in it. So all the verbs in a text, they can be your processes, okay. So let's see what we will do with the text. So this is the text that we saw earlier in the previous lectures when we were doing requirement engineering, and we actually saw it when we made the context DFD or a level 0 DFD of this example in the last lecture. Okay, so if you kind of go through it, then you can see that these are the verbs that we can identify. So for example, the safe home security function enables the homeowner to configure the security system when it is installed, monitors all the sensors connected to the security system, and interacts with the homeowner through the internet, PC, or a control panel. So we can see that there are a lot of potential processes that we have identified. Number one is that the security home function, it enables the homeowner. How does it enable? It basically configure. So we can straight away say, okay, that configure, that can be one process that we can say, okay, it enables the homeowner to actually do something, okay. The second is it monitors all the sensors. So one sub process can be monitor sensors, okay, because this is very important, क्योंकि जो sensor event आना है वो monitor sensor ही शायद लेगा, and then it will detect कि कौन सा sensor था, or then it will basically generate different kind of outputs from that. Okay जी. Then during installation, let's read the second paragraph or the second bullet. During installation, the safe home PC is used to program and configure the system. We have already gone through that configure can be one of the sub processes. Each sensor is assigned a number and type. A master password is programmed for arming and disarming the system, and telephone number are input for dialing when a sensor event occurs. Okay, again we can see कि एक हमारे output हो सकता है, एक हमारा sub process हो सकता है which deals with the output only, because depending on the sensor type and depending on the sensor ID, we would have to call different telephone lines, okay. As I already said, in case of fire, you want to call fire brigade, okay. So we need one sub process that would handle that, okay. Okay, so once you actually see that, on the basis of that, you can say that the first one is that before we actually start discussing this diagram, let me just go back and tell, and we should recap that we saw कि जी हम जब level, when we are at level 1, so our boundaries are basically this is our boundary of this DFD, and this highlighted area in this diagram, that is basically the safe home software main bubble, which was in context level DFD of or a level 0 DFD. So you can see that we have actually decomposed the safe home software into how many small sub processes. We have now one, you can call 1.0, we have 2, we have 3.0, we have 4.0, we have 5.0 and then we have this 6.0. So we have decomposed the saveform software into 6 sub-processes. Okay, and as we started reading that text, then we identified कि जी जब control panel से input आएगी तो we need a sub-process which handles that input. Okay, so the first sub-process that we have created, that is interact with the user. Okay, because why we need that? क्योंकि जब user ने कोई input देनी है तो we need somebody to actually analyze कि वो input है क्या and then do some action. Okay, so if the user has entered the password in the input, then we have created another sub process. ठीक है, क्योंकि अब हमारा user कुछ भी डाटा दे सकता है, या तो वो पासवर्ड दे सकता है, या आपकी कॉन्फ़िगरेशन की सेटिंग चेंज कर सकता है, या वो कहेगा कि जी आई एम इनसाइड द हाउस, आई वांट टू स्टॉप द डिवाइस. ओके, सो देयर आर 3 थिंग्स पॉसिबली दैट ही कैन एंटर. ओके, सो एक हमने सब प्रोसेस बना दिया जो कि उस इनपुट को लेगा, और बाकी जो 3 सब प्रोसेसेस है they are basically then dealing with that particular input. Okay, so in case it's a password, so we have created a sub process which we call process password. Okay, and all this sub process would do, it would basically make sure that the password the user has entered, whether it's correct or not. Okay, similarly we have created this 3.0 which basically deals with the case when the customer says that he wants to activate this saveform software or deactivate this. So we have created another sub process which is activate deactivate system. Okay, and if the user wants to change the configuration settings, just for example he wants to automate the system कि रात को he knows कि after 10 nobody comes in and he can the solution or the saveform software should automatically turn on. Okay जी, so he, for example, this is one of the configuration that he would want to change. So configuration request के लिए we have created another sub process which is configure system. Okay, now these are the different kind of inputs. Okay, but the process password, it generates the output valid ID message. Okay, valid ID message का मतलब क्या है कि if the password is correct तो आपके डिस्प्ले पे भी जाना चाहिए कि जी पासवर्ड करेक्ट है. इसी तरह अगर आप एक्टिवेट डीएक्टिवेट कर रहे हैं तो आपके डिस्प्ले पे क्या जाना चाहिए कि आपका जो डिवाइस है और द सेवफॉर्म सोल्यूशन है दैट इज आइदर एक्टिवेटेड और इट्स डीएक्टिवेटेड. सिमिलरली कॉन्फ़िगरेशन डाटा भी जब आप कॉन्फ़िगरेशन चेंज कर रहे हैं तो डिस्प्ले पे आना चाहिए यूजर को कि ही हैज चेंज सम कॉन्फ़िगरेशंस. ओके, and we said that in the when we were going through the text that we will create one sub process which would deal with different kinds of output messages that would be displayed to the user. So we have created one sub process which we have named display message and status. Okay, and what this sub process is doing is it's basically dealing with that data outflow जो हमारा main data outflow था जो कि control panel display पे जा रहा था, display information. Okay, तो इसके ऊपर जितनी भी inputs आ रही हैं, it's basically taking the input and depending on what he wants to show to the user, depending on what the user has entered, it will display that message to the control panel. Okay, यानी कि जितनी भी हमने different तरह की output थी उसके लिए एक अलग सब process बना दिया. Okay, now let's look at the monitor. Another sub process that we thought that we need, that was monitor sensors. क्योंकि ये हमें किस लिए चाहिए? क्योंकि we saw कि we have assigned a ID and the type to every sensor. ठीक है, जिस तरह फायर सेंसर्स अगर घर में 3 लगे हुए हैं तो हर एक की जो ID होगी that is different and the type is fire sensor. Okay, similarly अगर motion sensors, we have 10 motion sensors, so every motion sensor should have a different ID because we want to know okay, for example if somebody is actually broken into house through main door or through some window, we would want to know that. That's why we need another sub process जो कि बताएगा कि what's the location of that sensor and what's the type of that sensor. ठीक है, and on the basis of that what we would do, we would call, if it's a fire sensor, we want to call the fire brigade through this data outflow and we want to sound a different kind of alarm. Okay, so and this also sends some information to this display. ठीक है, तो डिस्प्ले पे एक और चीज भी आ जाएगी कि अगर यूजर को भी नोटिफाई करना है कि कौन सी जगह पे आपका इंट्रूडर आया है, कौन सी जगह पे फायर है, तो ही कैन एक्चुअली सी दैट ऑन द कंट्रोल पैनल. ओके, सो दीज आर द डिफरेंट सब प्रोसेस दैट वी हैव सीन. अनदर थिंग दैट वी सी इन दिस लेवल 1 DFD is this data store. Okay, and why we need this data store? We need this data store क्योंकि यूजर की जो कॉन्फ़िगरेशन सेटिंग्स है that are actually saved. ठीक है, क्योंकि यूजर ये तो नहीं होगा कि यूजर जब भी लॉगिन करेगा हर दफा वो अपने डिवाइस को कॉन्फ़िगर करेगा. ओके, दैट विल नॉट बी द केस. द कॉन्फ़िगरेशन विल बी सेव्ड अनलेस एंड अनटिल यूजर वांट्स टू चेंज इट. सो वी नीड अ स्मॉल डेटाबेस और अ डाटा स्टोर वेयर वी वुड कीप दैट थिंग. तो जब भी आपको अपने सिस्टम में लगे कि देयर इज सम डाटा दैट यू नीड टू सेव, तो यू क्रिएट अ डाटा स्टोर. जिस तरह हमने इसका नाम रखा है कॉन्फ़िगरेशन इन्फॉर्मेशन. ओके, नाउ इफ यू लुक एट ऑल दीज लेबल्स, ओके, देन you can see what we discussed कि जितने भी verbs होते हैं, ठीक है, they are usually the sub process. जिस तरह अगर आप पहला देखें interacts with the user, then we have process password, we have activate, deactivate system, configure system, display messages and monitor. So there is a verb there, okay. And if you look at the data flows, then you can see these are either nouns and adjectives. For example, you have password, you have start and stop, you have configure request, you have valid ID message and activation message, sensor information. So you can actually see that none of them are verbs, because they cannot be, because we are interested through these flows. We want to know what data is flowing into a process or what data is going out of a process, okay. So that's what we are interested in. So, and another thing that we discussed when we discussed level 1 DFDs, that a level 1 DFD can have, or it does have, all the elements that can be in a DFD. So if you see it at this level 1 DFD, then we can actually observe that it has the entities, it has data flows, it has data stores, and it has processors. So it has everything. So this is the level 1 DFD. Now let's see if we can decompose one of the processes in this level 1 DFD to create a level 2 DFD. Okay. Okay. Now this slide, this shows that what we are interested in. We want to know कि how does that monitor sensor process, okay जी, जो कि हमारा था which was 6.0, okay. So अगर आप ये बाउंड्री देखें, ये बाउंड्री ज़हन में रखिएगा कि we discussed that the boundary of this level 2 DFD is, वो अगर आपको अपना याद हो, मॉनिटर सेंसर वाला जो हमारा सब प्रोसेस था जिसको हमने 6.0 का लेवल दिया था, दैट इज द बाउंड्री ऑफ दिस. और मॉनिटर सेंसर वाले में से अगर एक और चीज़ आपको याद हो, दे वर बेसिकली टू डाटा इनफ्लोस एंड 3 डाटा आउटफ्लोस. ठीक है, लेट्स गो एट द लास्ट स्लाइड, जिसमें इसमें 2 डाटा इनफ्लोस कौन से थे. एक तो इसमें आ रहा था सेंसर स्टेटस जो कि एक एंटिटी से आ रहा था, फिर इसके अंदर कन्फिगरेशन इन्फॉर्मेशन आ रही थी जो कि सेंसर से आ रही थी. ठीक है, वो किस लिए आनी चाहिए, क्योंकि अगर यूजर ने सेव किया कि 10 बजे मेरे साथ सेंसर एक्टिव हो जाए तो वो कन्फिगरेशन ही बताएगा इस प्रोसेस को. तो 2 इनपुट्स थी, 3 आउटपुट्स क्या थी, एक तो अलार्म को जा रही थी, एक टेलीफोन को लाइन जा रही थी, और थर्ड थी सेंसर इन्फॉर्मेशन जो कि डिस्प्ले सब प्रोसेस को जा रही थी. तो अब अगर आप इसको देखें कि अब इसकी लेवल 2 की बाउंड्रीज के अगर आप आएँ तो अगर आप इनको काउंट करें तो हाउ मेनी डाटा फ्लोज यू कैन सी, वी हैव 1 2 3 4 5. So still we have 5. So this is a balanced DFD. हमारा डाटा के जो inflows outflows थे इस boundary के they are same. So this is very important. Okay. And secondly, so the number of data flows are same, which is very important. Now this DFD is balanced. Okay जी. Another thing which we said कि इसके अंदर अगर आप देखें तो हमने entities भी show की हुई हैं. We also shown the data store, but this is optional. ठीक है. If we even do not show these 2 things and we just show कि 2 data flow आ रहे हैं तो that is enough. Okay, so we do not need to show that क्योंकि एक चीज़ हमने जो कही थी कि शायद entities level 2 पे नहीं बनाते आप. ठीक है, तो this is true, you can get away with that. लेकिन because I'm trying to explain this, so that's why we have them here, but this is optional. You know, if you do not want them, you can it's fine. Okay, now let's see कि पहली चीज़ तो थी जो कि एक्सटर्नल एंटिटी सेंसर से हमारे पास आ रही थी, दैट वाज सेंसर स्टेटस. ओके, अब सेंसर स्टेटस तो आएगा, यानी कि सबसे यहाँ पे पहली चीज़ हमें क्या चाहिए कि जो भी सेंसर का स्टेटस आया है वी वांट टू नो कि इस सेंसर की आईडी क्या है, इस सेंसर की टाइप क्या है और सेंसर की लोकेशन क्या है. ठीक है, तो हमने क्या किया, हमने रीड सेंसर से बेसिकली एक सब प्रोसेस बना दिया जिसको हमने कह दिया कि जी ये सबसे पहला क्या काम करेगा, दिस इज द फर्स्ट सब प्रोसेस फॉर दिस मॉनिटर सेंसर प्रोसेस. ठीक है, जो कि क्या करता है, जो कि सेंसर से अगर कोई इवेंट आता है या सेंसर स्टेटस की इंफॉर्मेशन आती है तो ये उसको रीड करता है. ठीक है जी, जब ये उसको रीड कर लेता है तो इसको पता लग जाता है कि सेंसर की आईडी क्या है और सेंसर की टाइप क्या है. सो दिस इज द डाटा दैट विल गो आउट ऑफ दिस सब प्रोसेस. ठीक है, और दिस वुड गो टू दिस सब प्रोसेस विल देन मॉनिटर दिस इन कंपैरिजन विद द कॉन्फ़िगरेशन डाटा. ठीक है, कि अब ये इसको उसने मैच किया. ठीक है, और देन इट बेसिकली, क्योंकि हमने एक देखा था कि एक इससे आउटपुट जा रही थी जो कि डिस्प्ले पे जा रही थी. ठीक है, तो इसने क्या किया, जब इसने एसेस किया उसे तो वो जो सेंसर आईडी टाइप एंड लोकेशन थी वो डिस्प्ले पे चली गई. जिस तरह मैंने कहा था कि डिस्प्ले पे भी यूजर को पता लगना चाहिए कि इफ देयर इज फायर तो इन विच पार्ट ऑफ द हाउस देयर इज फायर. ओके जी, सिमिलरली देयर आर 2 अदर आउटपुट्स दैट कैन बी जनरेटेड फ्रॉम दिस सब प्रोसेस, ओके, विच इज अलार्म डाटा and which is telephone number. ठीक है। और अलार्म के लिए हमने क्या कर दिया, एक और सब प्रोसेस बना दिया, क्योंकि अलार्म डाटा के ऊपर डिपेंड करेगा कि कौन सी तरह का अलार्म आपने देना है, ठीक है। इफ इट्स एन इंट्रूडर इट्स अ डिफरेंट अलार्म, इफ इट्स फायर देयर इज डिफरेंट अलार्म। तो उसके लिए हमने क्या था, सब प्रोसेस बना दिया जो कि जनरेट अलार्म सिग्नल कर रहा है एंड इट्स सेंडिंग दैट टू अलार्म एंटिटी। एंड सिमिलरली for telephone lines we have created another sub process which is dial telephone number. If it's police you want to dial, then you want to dial a different number, and if it's fire brigade then you want to dial a different number. So that's why we have this sub process. So this is a level 2 DFD and we have seen that this is balanced because the number of data inflows and the number of data outflows, they match to the level 1 DFD, to the monitor sensor process in level 1. Okay? So we can see that this is 6.1, 6 point, and we can number them again. So 6.1, and this would be 6.2, we can call it 6.3, and this is 6.4, and this is 6.5. Okay, so this is level 2 for the safe home software. Okay ji, now let's look at another example. Okay ji, first of all let's go through the text so you guys know what we are dealing with. Okay ji, a club sends out annual reminders to the members. Okay, now first of all you have to first thing that we have to figure out is that what is the main processor or what is the main software that we are actually going to make. Okay ji, now let's go through this statement and then we'll try to identify. Okay, so a club sends out annual reminders to the members to pay their subscription for another year. Okay, now we know by this, even by reading this first line, that the software is about a club, okay, which deals with its member. Okay, so you can call it a club member solution or something like that, you can call it that. Okay, so this would be the name of our main process at the context level. Okay ji, so this would be the name of our sub process, or this would be the name of this would be the name of our main process at the context level. Okay ji, and in this first line there are a few other things that we see. Okay, first of all we can identify that one external entity which is the member. Okay ji, okay, so a club sends out annual reminders to the members, okay, to pay their subscription for another year, and analysis of the member types is made to be presented at the annual meeting. Okay ji, now we have these entities, we have annual journal meeting, okay, we have a treasurer and we have members. Okay, now there is something which you would see in this level 0 DFD, that we have created this external entity twice. We have this member here and member here, but one thing that we have missed is that if we create, we discussed that in our last lecture, that if we duplicate an entity or duplicate a process, then we can basically do that, but we need to draw this diagonal line which would say that this is something same, but we are drawing it for clarity purposes, because in this case the clarity purpose was that I wanted to show okay there is one input coming from this member and there is an output going to the member. जैसे output क्या जा रही है, क्लब की तरफ से जा रहा है, member को जा रहा है उसका क्या आपने पेमेंट करनी है, और member की तरफ से क्या आ रहा है, member डिटेल आ रही है, ठीक है, और treasurer नेम और पेमेंट बता रहा है। इसी तरह एनुअल जनरल मीटिंग के ऊपर नंबर एंड कैटेगरीज ऑफ मेंबर्स आ रहे हैं ताकि पता लगे कि हमारे क्लब के कितने मेंबर्स हैं। ओके जी, दिस इज द कॉन्टेक्स्ट लेवल डीएफडी फॉर दिस पर्टिकुलर केस. Okay, let's see how this so this is the level 1 DFD for this particular example. There is a small mistake in this slide, that this should not be treasurer. This is actually a member again, and let's say that this is because duplication, so we need a diagonal line here. So what's happening here is that the member, it provides the member detail. Okay, so that data is coming in from the member. Okay, and on the basis of the member details, okay, for example उसको एक साल पहले उसने अपनी सब्सक्रिप्शन फी पे की थी, तो जब आपके पास मेंबर की डिटेल आएगी तो यू कैन पुल दैट इन्फॉर्मेशन. ठीक है, सो वी हैव क्रिएटेड अ सब प्रोसेस व्हिच वी हैव नेम्ड सेंड रिमाइंडर्स. ठीक है, और सेंड रिमाइंडर से आउटपुट क्या जा रही है, आप हर मेंबर को वो आउटपुट भेज रहे हैं अमाउंट ड्यू. ठीक है, इसी तरह मेंबर जो क्या कर रहा है, नेम एंड पेमेंट भी मेंबर से आ रही है. ठीक है, आपने क्या किया, क्योंकि मेंबर ने अब सिस्टम को क्या किया, उसने पेमेंट दी, तो पेमेंट को प्रोसेस करने के लिए वी क्रिएटेड अनदर सब प्रोसेस, तो वी क्रिएटेड टू सब प्रोसेसेस, वन इज सेंड रिमाइंडर्स एंड द अदर इज रिकॉर्ड पेमेंट. और जब पेमेंट आती है तो वी वांट टू नोटिफाई द एक्सटर्नल एंटिटी विच इज द ट्रायरर कि वी हैव रिसीव्ड द पेमेंट फ्रॉम दिस मेंबर. तो दिस डाटा फ्लो जो कि नेम एंड पेमेंट था, this is going to the trier, and similarly we the annual meeting पे जो जा रही है वो number and categories of members, that is also going. Again you can see in this DFD that the number of data inflows and outflows they are same, so they are 1 2 3 4 5, and if you go back here, so we have 1 2 3 4, and now if you count the number of data inflows and outflows in this DFD, they would match to the level 0. Now let's draw it the way level 0 DFD was drawn, because this is slightly confusing when you look at it in this fashion. So how many entities we had? We have member, we have triers, and the third one was annual general meeting. Okay, so let's say we draw these three entities. We call M for members, and then we have T for trier, and then we have this AGM which is for annual general meeting. Okay, now we have two sub processes. One was send reminders, and the other one is record payment. Okay, send reminder is sending reminder to the members. Member are basically making payment to this. Okay, and then there is one input between this send reminder and record payment, which is basically send reminder is telling this this member owes this much payment, and once the payment is made, there is a notification that goes to the trier. Okay, and the details of the members is also going to this. So this was the boundary of our level 1 DFD. Now if you see and count the data flows, we have one here, second is here, third is here, and the fourth. So there are basically 4 data inflows and outflows, so the number again matches. So this is something very important that you keep in mind, that the number of data flows, that should not change. So if you draw a boundary, when you decompose the process, then the number of data flows in and data flows out from that boundary, they should match. Okay, so this was the level 1 DFD for this club member solution. Now what I would want you guys to do that try to create level 2 DFD for this example and see how it goes. For example, when you record the payment, you might want to send an invoice to the customer, and for your own records you want to create some data stores which would have that information. For example, आपने इस customer को दोबारा reminder कब भेजना है, so you can have more data stores, you can have more sub processes. Try to think how you will decompose that further. Okay, and so you will come up with the level 2 DFD, and you can always share that with me. Okay, now let's see at another example, which is the gift online. So there is this solution which basically allows you to buy a gift online. So let's go through this description, and then we'll try to figure out how we'll make a level 0 DFD and how we'll go to further levels, level 1 and level 2. The gifts online provide online purchasing facilities, so the guests who have been invited to an occasion can select gifts from the list that have been prepared by the hosts. Okay, so let's start highlighting what can be our potential entities. Okay, so it will include, what this will include, it will include ordering the solution, it will include the provision of purchasing facilities, it will include provision of secure e-commerce transaction facilities, it will include wrapping and delivery after the guest has entered their username and password. So there is authentication. The user can select the name of the person for whom the occasion is being held from a keyword search facility. The system provides the user with the gifts that the host would like the guest to look at. The user can view and select one or more gifts by looking at the price, category, and details. After the user has placed the gifts in the shopping trolley, the user confirms the order. At this point, a secure payment gateway connection is established, and the user is required to enter the credit card details after finally submitting the order. The comms inventory and the payment databases are updated, and the user is sent an email with the order confirmation and delivery details. Okay, so we know that we have one entity, that is the guest, okay, and the guest is sending information to this gift online system is credit card details, और guest को वापस क्या जा रहा है, उसको transaction की confirmation जा रही है. Okay, and then there is this payment जिसके अंदर gift online की तरफ से confirmation details जा रही हैं secure payment gateway को, और वापस क्या आ रहा है, transaction details. Okay, now another possible entity that could have been there was basically the host. Okay, लेकिन we are assuming that on this solution host ने अपनी information डाली हुई है और सिर्फ guest आ रहे हैं और वो guest आके इसको उस इंफॉर्मेशन को दे आर बेसिकली सेइंग कि व्हाट ही और शी वांट्स हिम टू बाय, एंड उसको इंफॉर्मेशन को दे के उसको परचेज कर रहे हैं. तो हमारे कितने डाटा फ्लोज हैं? वी हैव 4 डाटा फ्लोज. सही है. So this is our gift online solution, which is our main process. We have these 4 data flows, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now we have seen कि हमारा जो gift online है इसके अंदर बहुत सी और चीज़ें हो रही हैं. ठीक है, अगर हम उन चीज़ों को पिछली स्लाइड पर जाके आइडेंटिफाई करने की कोशिश करें तो क्या क्या है? This will include ordering. ठीक है. Now this is our one sub process. So it has the purchasing facilities, it has the provision of secure e-commerce, okay, and you can select wrapping and delivery, ठीक है, and there would be some kind of user authentication क्योंकि there is username and password that comes in, ठीक है जी, and it provides the search facility as well. So you can see that there are a lot of things that, or a lot of the sub process that we can actually clearly identify when you read this text. Okay, let's see when we go to the level 1 how this looks like. Okay, now you can see that all the labels that are in blue, okay, they represent the data flows that were there in our level 0 or the context DFD. So this is the boundary of our level 1. अगर इस बाउंड्री के बाहर आप देखें तो there are only 4 data flows, ठीक है, जो कि हमने पहले भी देखे थे. ठीक है, we have this okay, one thing I think that is missing is basically we needed to create one more incoming data flow, which is user details. Okay, because essentially we have 5 data flows that are there. So again, we want to have them balanced. Okay, so what are the sub process that we can see in this? So the first one is we have called this approve user details. Okay, जो कि हमने कहा था कि user will enter a username and password. ठीक है, so whenever user enters his or her details, so you are basically checking it through your data store. ठीक है, कि ये बंदा हमारा proper registered user है भी कि नहीं है. Okay जी, and if he is not, तो we reject it. ठीक है, और if it's an approved user, तो what he can do, he can locate the gift list. ठीक है जी. अब गिफ्ट लिस्ट के अंदर उसको एक और हमारा डाटा स्टोर है जिसके ऊपर इवेंट्स लिस्ट हुए हैं, और इवेंट्स हमें होस्ट की लिस्ट आ रही है. ठीक है, अब हमने सेलेक्ट कर लिया कि हम किस बंदे के लिए गिफ्ट देने जा रहे हैं. फॉर एग्जांपल एक सोल्यूशन बना हुआ है, उसके ऊपर मेरे फॉर एग्जांपल माय फ्रेंड्स नेम इज XYZ, सो आई वांट टू सर्च कि XYZ की लिस्ट क्या है. तो वंस आई गेट द लिस्ट आई विल आइडेंटिफाई कि विच गिफ्ट आई वांट टू बाय. सो आई वुड बेसिकली गो टू दिस सब प्रोसेस, आई वुड सेलेक्ट अ गिफ्ट. ठीक है, और अगेन वी से कि हमारे पास गिफ्ट के लिए एक और डाटा स्टोर है जिससे हमारे पास गिफ्ट की डिटेल्स आ रही है. वंस वी हैव सिलेक्टेड द गिफ्ट वी वुड वांट टू कंफर्म द ऑर्डर. ठीक है, अब हमारे पास एक तो कंफर्मेशन डिटेल्स यहाँ से जा रही हैं, एंड सेकंड व्हाट वी वांट टू डू, वी वांट टू मेक सम पेमेंट. ओके जी, और वंस यू मेक द पेमेंट तो देयर इज 2 थिंग्स दैट वी आर डूइंग. वी हैव बेसिकली आर क्रेडिट डिटेल्स जो कि इस डाटा स्टोर से आ रही हैं, एंड वी हैव द ऑर्डर डिटेल्स जो कि इससे आ रही है, बिकॉज वी वांट टू रिकॉर्ड कि कितने एक्टिव ऑर्डर्स हमारी साइट से भी हुए हैं. ओके, क्योंकि वी वांट टू टेल पीपल हु हैव एक्चुअली ऑर्डर्ड समथिंग, वी वांट टू गिव देम एन ऑर्डर आईडी एंड स्टफ लाइक दैट. सो व्हाटएवर द इंफॉर्मेशन देयर इज वी नीड टू स्टोर दैट. ठीक है, क्योंकि एवरी ऑर्डर वुड हैव अ यूनिक ऑर्डर आईडी. ठीक है, एंड सम अदर इन्फॉर्मेशन एसोसिएटेड विद इट. फॉर एग्जांपल व्हाट्स द वैल्यू ऑफ द ऑर्डर, हाउ मेनी आइटम्स वर देयर इन द ऑर्डर, okay, and what on which date the order was actually placed, and when is the delivery date. So all this information needs to be stored. So we have another store order and we have a store payment. Okay जी, so this is how, and again जो हमने एक पिछली एग्जांपल में भी चीज़ डिस्कस की थी, if there is a duplication तो हमें उसको diagonals के साथ शो करना है, because we want to tell that this is the same entity as the other one in the slide. Okay जी, so this is the level 1 DFD for that gift online system, and if you look at process number 5, which is the confirm payment, okay, now we have created level 2 DFD for that. So this is the level 2 DFD, which is basically confirmation payment. अगर हम इसको देखें तो we have decomposed it into 4 sub processes. So first one is the process transaction. ठीक है जी. Now if that the transaction is approved, then the order will be created. ठीक है, the gifts will be ordered, और जब gift order होंगे तो inventory update हो जाएगी. ठीक है, जिसमें हमारा गिफ्ट का डेटाबेस था उसमें से वो वाला गिफ्ट हो जाएगा कि इट हैज बीन ऑर्डर्ड, सो दैट इफ समबडी एल्स वांट्स टू बाय द सेम गिफ्ट फॉर दैट गाय, तो ही वुड नो कि दिस गिफ्ट इज ऑलरेडी बीन परचेज्ड बाय समबडी एल्स, सो यू डू नॉट डू दैट. ओके, एंड अनदर थिंग, द ट्रांजैक्शन डिटेल्स वुड बी सेव्ड. ओके जी, सो दिस इज अगेन द लेवल 2, और इसी के अंदर भी अगर आप इस एग्जांपल्स को देखेंगे तो दीज एग्जांपल्स आर अगेन बैलेंस्ड. ठीक है, इफ यू लुक एट द लेवल 1 एंड लेवल 2, तो द नंबर ऑफ डाटा इनफ्लोज एंड द डाटा आउटफ्लोज थ्रू दिस बाउंड्री, they should be the same. Okay, Now let's look at another example, and this is a very famous example, and this has actually been explained in a very good way, and I've taken this from this source. You can actually find this particular example. If you even type that lemonade stand example creating DFDs, you will find this on the internet. And this is the reference given at the bottom of the slide, and the reference also given at the end of the lecture. So it's basically explains in a very proper way what we have discussed already. So the example is that the operation of a simple lemonade stand will be used to demonstrate the creation of data flow diagrams. Okay, so what are the steps involved? The old way was that we didn't use case diagrams, but the new way is that we use the use case descriptions. Okay, so we will construct the level 0, we will construct level 1 DFDs, and we'll see how many levels we go up to. We'll go up to level 2 DFDs. Okay ji. So the first step is the activities that would happen at a lemonade stand. Okay, so the first thing that somebody would do, there is a stand, some customer would come in and he would place an order. So this is the first activity that might take place. Then the product will be served to the customer, and then the customer would pay the amount. Okay, and then the product will be produced and the product is stored. So these are the activities that are done at the lemonade stand. Okay जी. But we saw कि ये activities काफ़ी नहीं है, ठीक है, क्योंकि आपने for example you need lemons to make lemonade, let's say. Okay, now that is the raw material in this case. So you need to order raw material, ठीक है, you need to pay for raw materials and you need to pay for labor. So we have identified more activities. Okay, now let's try to group these activities कि कौन सी activities आपस में मिलती जुलती हैं. Okay, जिस तरह जो customer order, serve product और collect payment है, these are all linked to who? These are all linked to the customer. ठीक है, इसी तरह produce product और store product है, that is linked to basically that lemonade stand or the person who is making that lemonade. इसी तरह जो order raw material और pay for raw materials है, this is maybe linked to a supplier. ठीक है, and this pay for labor is maybe you can call it payment or something like that. So you can create a rough grouping of these activities. ठीक है, okay जी. So on the basis of that grouping, we identify that we have these different entities. ठीक है, so we saw कि one of the entity that we wrote in the last slide, that was customer. ठीक है, अब customer ने कौन से काम किए थे? Customer orders, ठीक है, कस्टमर के लिए प्रोडक्ट सर्व होती है और कस्टमर पे करता है. तो दीज आर द 3 डाटा फ्लोज दैट आर गोइंग फ्रॉम दिस एंटिटी टू आवर लेमिनेट सिस्टम. ठीक है, इसी तरह हमारा जो वेंडर है, ठीक है, वी आर मेकिंग पेमेंट टू द वेंडर, वी आर receiving some goods from the vendor and we are sending a purchase order to the vendor. ठीक है, this is basically for the raw material. ठीक है, we call it supplier in the last slide. So again that was right. Okay जी. Then we have the employee or whoever is running that lemonade stand. ठीक है, तो हमने कहा था कि वो lemonade stand वाले बंदा क्या क्या कर रहा है. He is basically we have to pay that person. ठीक है, जो भी बंदा उस stand पे काम कर रहा है और उसका जो टाइम वो जितना काम कर रहा है वो भी हम रिकॉर्ड कर रहे हैं. इसी तरह प्रोडक्शन स्केड्यूल कि उसने कितने लेमिनेट के ग्लासेस बनाए. ठीक है, और दैट इज ऑल्सो स्टोर्ड इन द लेमिनेट सिस्टम. और फिर सेल्स फोरकास्ट is also going to that employee. So these are the different entities in the system. हमारी entities कितनी है? We have customer, we have employee and we have vendor. And how many data flows we have? We have 3 data flows associated with the customer, 3 associated with the vendor and 4 associated with the employee. Okay, so that was the level 0 DFD for this lemonade stand example. Okay ji. Now the next step is to identify the sub processes. Okay, हमारी entities भी हमें पता लगी हैं, data flows भी पता लगे. अब हमने जो lemonade stand था उसको सब processes के अंदर डिवाइड करना है. तो हमने क्या क्या सब प्रोसेस बना दिए. एक सब प्रोसेस तो हमारा बन जाएगा सेल का. ठीक है, यानी कि कस्टमर आया, उसने एक चीज़ ऑर्डर की तो हमने एक सेल का बना दिया. एक हम बना देते हैं प्रोडक्शन का, एक हम बना देते हैं प्रोक्योरमेंट का जो कि रॉ मटेरियल और उसकी परचेज से वेंडर के साथ डील करेगा. देन वी हैव वन प्रोसेस फॉर पे रोल, क्योंकि जो हमने एम्प्लॉई को पे करना है और उसका स्केड्यूल रिकॉर्ड करना है कि उसने कितने ग्लासेस बनाए थे या उसने कितना काम किया, तो दैट वुड बी हैंडल्ड बाय payroll. So we have identified that there can be 4 sub processes. We have sale, we have production, we have procurement and we have payroll. अब अगर आप कस्टमर के डाटा फ्लोज को देखें कि जो कस्टमर ऑर्डर था दैट वुड गो टू सेल, कस्टमर पेमेंट वुड गो टू सेल, लेकिन सेल के ऊपर जब कस्टमर का ऑर्डर आएगा तो हमें पता लग जाएगा यार कस्टमर ने कोई प्रोडक्ट ऑर्डर की है, और जब वो प्रोडक्ट ऑर्डर होगी आप प्रोडक्शन में जाएंगे, आप प्रोडक्ट कस्टमर को सर्व कर देंगे, तो ये कस्टमर के तीनों डाटा फ्लो तो यहाँ पे हैंडल हो गए। अच्छा, जब आपने प्रोडक्शन की है तो एक और काम प्रोडक्शन के लिए आपको शायद इनपुट चाहिए होगी, वो प्रोक्योरमेंट से चाहिए होगी, फॉर एग्जांपल लेमन्स चाहिए, कोई चीज़ चाहिए, तो दैट इज कमिंग फ्रॉम दिस इन्वेंट्री। ठीक है, ये इन्वेंट्री से आ रही है। और प्रोक्योरमेंट के सारा वेंडर के जितने भी डाटा फ्लोज है, जो 3 डाटा फ्लोज हमने पिछली साइड में देखे थे लेवल 0 DFD के अंदर, दे आर डेल्ट विद दिस सब प्रोसेस प्रोक्योरमेंट। ठीक है, क्योंकि प्रोक्योरमेंट से ही परचेज ऑर्डर वेंडर को जा रहा है, प्रोक्योरमेंट में ही आप रिसीव कर रहे हैं और प्रोक्योरमेंट के थ्रू आप वेंडर को पे कर रहे हैं। सो दीज 3 थिंग्स दे आर हैंडल्ड बाय दिस प्रोक्योरमेंट सब प्रोसेस। और प्रोक्योरमेंट से अच्छा एम्प्लॉई भी क्या कर रहा है, एम्प्लॉई जो है ऑर्डर डिसीजन की एक इनपुट है वो भी इसे भेज रहा है, पेरोल के थ्रू आप पे कर रहे हैं और टाइम वर्क आपको कस्टमर अपना एम्प्लॉई बता रहा है, और एक जो सेल की तरफ से सेल्स फोरकास्ट है वो भी एम्प्लॉई के पास आ रही है। सो दिस इज हाउ वी डिकम्पोज दिस पर्टिकुलर एग्जाम्पल, क्योंकि हमने ये आइडेंटिफाई कर लिया था कि जो लेमनेड स्टैंड है, ऑन दैट लेमनेड स्टैंड देयर विल बी मल्टीपल थिंग्स दैट वुड बी हैपनिंग। ठीक है, देयर वुड बी सेल्स गोइंग ऑन, you would be producing something and you would be ordering some stuff, and then somebody who's working there you need to pay him. So there were basically 4 things happening. So on the basis of that हमने पहले एक्टिविटीज को ग्रुप किया, जिससे हमने आइडेंटिफाई कर लिया कि कौन कौन ये काम करेगा। ठीक है, जिस तरह कस्टमर जो था वो ऑर्डर करेगा और पैसे देगा और यू विल सर्व टू द कस्टमर। इसी तरह you will identify which raw material you need and then some vendor would supply that, then you will make the payment to the vendor. इसी तरह there would be an employee, the employee would give you the production schedule, he will update the inventory, he would also log in the hours that he had worked in, and then you will pay him. Okay, so on the basis of that हमने देखा कि we need some sub processes to handle these all inputs. ठीक है, one was sale which would deal with the customer कि what kind of product the customer has ordered, and then there is production which will deal with the customer order and depends on that some product would be produced, and this production sub process would also update inventory in a way, क्योंकि जो चीज़ आप consume करेंगे it needs to be updated in the inventory. ठीक है, then we have another sub process procurement, that sub process deals with what are the products that you actually need from the vendor. Okay, and then you have a payroll which actually deals with the payment to the employee. Okay ji, so this is the level 1 DFD when we have actually decomposed our main process into these sub processes. Okay ji, now let's look at the level 2 DFD for this production. ठीक है जी, so this is actually level 2 DFD. Okay, in this particular example, one thing that is they have used different notation. Okay, now these are basically level 2 DFDs, but they have called them level 1 because the first DFD they have called them context DFD. Okay, but what we have covered, and we will still follow that this is basically the level 1 DFD. Okay, this is what we have discussed, and this is level 1 DFD, and the further DFDs which decompose these processes that we have identified at level 1, these are level 2. So this is basically level 2 DFD for sale sub process, यानी कि जो हमारा sales वाला था, this is level 2 DFD for that. The next one gives you level 2 DFD for production, and the next one gives you level 2 DFD for procurement, जो हमारा 3 था। इसी तरह this gives you level 2 DFD for payroll. Okay जी, so let's look at them one by one. So the level 2 DFD for the sale, what it does, it receives that order. So you can see that एक चीज़ हमने डिस्कस की थी जब हमने अपने लास्ट लेक्चर में कहा था कि तो there were actually no data stores shown at level 1. Okay, there were actually no data stores shown at level 1, whereas in this level 2 we have multiple data stores. जिस तरह we are, if we want to record who are our customers, then we need a store for that. And if we want to maintain or record the orders that have been placed on a particular date, we need a data store for orders. इसी तरह if we want to record the payments, we need a data store for payment. So you can see that there are 3 data stores introduced in this particular level 2 DFD for sale. And you can see कि यहाँ पे क्या हो रहा है, पहला वाला जो हमारा सब प्रोसेस है that is record order, second sub process is receive payment, and the third sub process is produce sales forecast. So we have these 3 sub processes. Okay जी, and again this would be balanced. ओके जी, सो हमने अपनी सेल को 3 हिस्सों में डिवाइड कर लिया. इसी तरह अगर आप अपने प्रोडक्शन वाले पे जाएं तो उसको भी हमने 3 में डिवाइड कर लिया. वन इज सर्विंग द प्रोडक्ट, दूसरा इज प्रोड्यूसिंग द प्रोडक्ट, एंड थर्ड वन इज स्टोरिंग द प्रोडक्ट. सो वी हैव बेसिकली 3 सब प्रोसेसेस फॉर दैट. एंड सिमिलरली वी हैव डिकम्पोज्ड आवर procurement into 3 sub processes. We have produce purchase order because once we want to tell the vendor कि जी हमें क्या क्या चीज़ें लेनी है तो हमें एक परचेज ऑर्डर बना के वेंडर को देना है. द सेकंड वन इज रिसीविंग द आइटम्स फ्रॉम द वेंडर एंड द थर्ड वन इज पेइंग द वेंडर. सो हमने उन तीनों कामों को जो हम वेंडर के साथ कर रहे थे उनको 3 सब प्रोसेसेस के अंदर डिवाइड कर दिया. सिमिलरली हमने अपना जो पेरोल था उसको भी 3 हिस्सों में डिवाइड कर दिया. एक हमने कह दिया रिकॉर्ड टाइम वर्क, जो कि एम्प्लॉई अपने घंटे जितने हाउ मेनी आवर्स ही हैज वर्कड इन, ही इज रिकॉर्डिंग दैट. सो वी हैव वन सब प्रोसेस फॉर दैट. देन we will calculate his pay on the basis of the number of hours he has worked in. So we have another. और इसी तरह इसके अंदर भी अगर आप देखेंगे तो we have new data source. एक हमने टाइम कार्ड्स का बना दिया, एक हमने एम्प्लॉई का डेटाबेस बना दिया और एक हमने पेरोल का भी डाटा सोर्स शो कर दिया. So on this final slide what's actually happening is, again in this particular example the notation is used slightly different, but we usually call this level 0 or context level DFD. This is level 1 and this is level 2. So do not get confused with the notation in this particular or this last example, laminate stand example. Wherever they have called level 0, this is actually our level 1 DFD, and the level which they have called level 1, this is level 2, because the context DFD we also call it level 0 DFD. Okay, so keep that in mind that the context DFD is also a level 0 DFD, and following that we have level 1 and level 2. Now this diagram just shows that how the decomposition has taken place in this particular case. So at level 0 we had this laminate system. Okay, then at level 1 we decomposed that level it into these following sub processes. We created a sale sub process, we created a production sub process, we created a procurement sub process, and we created the payroll sub process. So at level 1 we had these 4 sub processes. When we look at level 2, so we decomposed the sale into 2 sub processes, which was record order and receive payment. Similarly, we decompose production into 3 sub-processes: serve product, produce product, and store product. We decompose procurement into 3 sub-processes: produce purchase order, receive items, and pay the vendor. And similarly, we decompose payroll into 3 sub-processes. So at level 2, we have decomposed 4 level 1 processes into 11 sub-processes. So by this diagram you can see how this decomposition works, and you can actually see how this decomposition helps you understand the working of the system. Okay, so this is actually a very good way, and I would suggest that if you try these DFDs at home, try to make this kind of a diagram at the end, and you would realize that how much you have actually learned through this exercise about your system or the solution that you're trying to model. Okay ji, so this was the last example that we have covered in today's lecture. And so let's quickly summarize of what we covered about DFDs. So we started off with very introduction of DFDs and the obvious questions that we always ask us, that why do we need to use a particular diagram and where that diagram fits in. So with DFDs we identify that they come in analysis phase, and the new way or the modern way of drawing these DFDs is that you use the use case descriptions and draw these DFDs. Okay, and it is basically the analysis view of how the customer product will look like once you actually make the solution. Okay, and we saw that in a DFD there are 4 elements. There are data stores, there are data flows, there are processes, and there are entities. Okay, and we realized that how do we number them and how we label them, and we also saw that we can basically decompose a DFD we can even go up to level 8 DFDs. Okay, and we can decompose it further if it's a very complex solution that you are going to make. Okay, and in today's lecture in particular we have seen different examples. So we've gone through the first 3 examples in a lot of detail. The 4th example I told you it was I have already given you the reference, and in the last slide you can find the reference. In this slide you can also find the reference of that laminate stand example, but do not be confused with that particular example because you saw that they have used slightly different notation. Okay, but always remember that the first DFD or the overview or the context DFD, that is also called the level 0 DFD, and then we call level 1 DFD and level 2. See, so the numbering of their processes is slightly different and their DFDs is slightly different, but we have seen different examples, and what I want from you guys to do is go and try to think of anything. For example, if you go to a tea shop and just observe what are the processes that they actually follow, okay, and try to model a DFD for that, because then you would be able to actually gauge the importance of this of this particular tool DFD, that how it actually helps in your understanding of a particular solution. Assalamu alaikum, and inshallah in the next lecture we will be covering class diagrams. Assalamu alaikum.